For 6 months, Mara Quinn moved through the rhythms of her days at the Larkspur Diner with a quiet defiance that no one noticed. The diner was a tired place on the edge of Silver Creek, Montana, its bell above the door giving more of a weary, metallic clank than a cheerful jingle. To the locals, it was background noise, the pulse of a small town that rarely changed. To Mara, that clank was the sound of another shift beginning. Another long day of coffee refills, Hank the owner barking about profit margins, Gus the cook grumbling over the grill. But beneath those ordinary details was something secret that lived in Booth 4 at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. Every weekday at that precise time, a boy appeared. He slipped inside as if trying not to exist, a shadow that carried more silence than any child should. His name, unknown to Mara then, was Noah Vale. He was small for 10, with brown hair that seemed to rebel against any attempt at taming and clothing that hung off him. Too big, too late in season. He carried a spiral notebook nearly worn through and a pencil stub sharpened down until hardly anything was left to grip. He never ordered, spoke, or lifted his gaze for more than a heartbeat. He slid into Booth 4, the one patched with gray tape, and existed there like a ghost that only Mara could see. The first time she noticed him, she had tried her standard warmth, a smile, a gentle greeting, a question. His shoulders had jumped, his knuckles whitening around the pencil, his eyes fixed on the blank page before him. There had been no reply, only silence thick enough to make her heart ache. Hank had grumbled from behind the counter that he should be gone if he was not buying. Mara knew the tone, knew what would come next, and refused to let it happen. In that moment, she acted, claiming the boy was ordering the usual, though he had never once spoken. She paid for the meal herself, and her thin wad of tips was sacrificed without hesitation. A grilled cheese, a small milk, and a handful of fries were set before him, as if they were natural. The way he stared at the food, not at her, but at the sustenance itself, made every dollar feel like an investment in something larger than her rattling car or overdue rent. That was how the ritual began. Each day at 3:15, Noah arrived. Mara found a way to put a plate in front of him each day, slipping it past Hank with lies about mistaken orders or staff meals. Each day, she absorbed the loss into her own thinning margins, and each day, Noah left behind something extraordinary. At first, it was a sketch of the diner's salt shaker, followed by the sugar dispenser, and then Gus framed it in the kitchen window. His drawings were sharp, detailed, alive. They were his language, a way of speaking when his voice would not. Mara collected them in a shoebox beneath her bed, a growing archive of silent conversations between herself and the boy. No one else seemed to notice. The town was small enough that strangers rarely went unseen. Yet when Mara described the boy to regulars, no one claimed to know him. He existed only in the space between the weary clank of the door and the scrape of his pencil on paper. She named him Noah because he seemed like a boy carrying too much water and too many storms, building an ark of drawings that no one else would see. She took questions like weight in her chest. Where did he come from? Who looked after him? Did he have enough to eat on the days he did not sit in Booth 4? No answers ever came. She did not know that each sketch was a breadcrumb or that each meal was a thread binding her to a secret larger than both. To her, it was kindness, rebellion against the hardness of Hank and the indifference of the world. It was a sanctuary to Noah, the only place he could exist without fear. Mara believed she was only feeding a hungry boy. She did not yet understand that she was feeding a story that would erupt into her life with the force of black SUVs and men in tailored suits. She did not yet understand that her small defiance was hiding a fortune, a family war, and a danger that would descend on her with silent precision. For now there was only the diner, the clank of the bell, the scratch of a pencil, the warmth of grilled cheese, and the shoebox under her bed. For now only a waitress chose kindness when it cost her something, and a boy answered in sketches when he could not speak. But the clock was ticking, each day drawing them closer to the moment when that kindness would collide with the ruthless machinery of wealth and inheritance. In Silver Creek, secrets did not stay buried forever, and Mara Quinn was about to learn that hers was sitting across from her every day at Booth 4, small, silent, and carrying the weight of millions. It was a Thursday when the pattern broke. Rain hammered against the expansive front windows of the Larkspur Diner, silver streaks sliding down the glass and turning the neon sign outside into a blurred smear of red light. At 3:15 the bell clanked as usual, the sound too weary to belong to anything dramatic. Yet the boy who slipped inside that day was not the same as the one Mara Quinn had come to expect. Noah Vale was drenched, his jacket clinging to his thin frame, his hair plastered in uneven strands across his forehead. His small shoulders shivered with each breath, but it was not the wetness that made Mara's chest tighten. It was the bruise. A dark, ugly mark bloomed across his cheekbone, half hidden by his hair but impossible to miss. It was fresh, raw in its swelling. Mara felt something cold press against her heart. All the quiet questions she had carried about him, questions she had tried to ignore, sharpened in an instant into fear. She abandoned the tray she had been holding and knelt beside Booth 4, her apron brushing against the tiled floor. Noah kept his eyes down, his hand clutching his pencil as though it could protect him. "Honey, what happened?" she whispered, forgetting the silence that always followed her attempts. For the briefest moment, his eyes flicked up, and what she saw there made her blood run colder than the rain outside. Fear, ancient and deep, the kind that no child should know. Then his gaze dropped again, retreating behind the shield of his notebook. He flinched when her hand hovered near his sleeve, pulling his jacket tighter around himself, as if her concern were another blow he could not risk. Mara stood quickly, blinking away the heat in her eyes, and darted back to the kitchen window. Gus raised an eyebrow, but said nothing when she called out for tomato soup and a grilled cheese, adding cheese so thick it nearly spilled from the bread. She slid the plate before Noah, her hands trembling, but he ate with a hunger more urgent than usual. His small fingers shook around the spoon. He finished in minutes, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and slid out of the booth as silently as ever. But this time, what he left behind on the table weakened Mara's knees. It was not a sketch of a salt shaker or a smiling pancake. It was a drawing of a house. The paper bore the sharp lines of a grand building, its windows black voids, its roof jagged against the page. The gables looked like teeth, and the doorway had a yawning mouth. In front of the house stood a stick-figure man, and though it was crude, the anger was unmistakable. Jagged lines scarred the mouth, as if rage had been etched into the page. Mara stared at it, a sick dread uncoiling inside her. This was not imagination. This was memory. This was a message. She folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. The paper felt heavy, heavier than it should. Once light and straightforward, her act of kindness had crossed into something darker. She was no longer just a waitress feeding a hungry child. She was holding evidence of a wound deeper than hunger. The bruise on his face, the house on the page, the angry man looming over him, they spoke louder than Noah ever could. For the rest of her shift, she could barely focus. Every clank of the bell startled her. Every time the door opened, she half expected men in dark coats to storm in, demanding the boy. She lasted until closing, then hurried through the wet streets with the drawing clutched in her pocket. She did not go straight home. Instead, she walked to the small brick building on Main Street where Sheriff Dale Rowan kept his office. Rowan was a man whose family had been in Silver Creek since its founding, a sheriff who wore his badge with a sense of duty, but carried more burdens than resources. He listened while she explained, his brow furrowing deeper as she laid the drawing on his desk. He turned it in his hands, tapping his finger against the sketch of the house. "It is a good drawing, Mara," he said slowly. "The boy's got talent, but this isn't much to go on. It could be from a cartoon, or it could be imagination. Without a name, without an address, my hands are tied." "But the bruise," Mara pressed, "that's real. Someone hurt him." "I hear you," Rowan answered, his voice gentle but tired. "I'll ask the school liaison to watch for a boy who matches. Quiet, draws a lot. But we can't knock on doors with just a child's sketch." She left the office frustrated, the weight of the folded paper still pressing against her. The system demanded names, documents, and proof. She had none of those. All she had was a mute boy and a shoebox full of pencil sketches. The following days did not bring relief. If anything, Noah's drawings grew more detailed, more unsettling. It is a sleek black car with a hood ornament shaped like a bird with swept wings. A face, sharp-jawed with cold eyes and lips drawn in a sneer. Each new page was another piece of a puzzle she did not know how to solve. Mara began to watch the clock not with the warmth of expectation, but with dread. At 3:15, she no longer smiled at the clank of the bell. She braced herself. She worried if he would appear, concerned if he did, what new shadow he would bring with him. And every time she slid him a meal, she knew she was feeding something more dangerous than hunger. She fed a secret growing larger, darker, and more complex to hide. The first sign came on an ordinary afternoon when the diner was nearly empty. Mara Quinn moved from table to table, wiping down surfaces that did not need cleaning, her mind restless and uneasy. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened with puddles that reflected the faded neon glow of the Larkspur sign. At 3:15, the bell clanked again, tired as always, and Noah Vale slipped in, his small figure half swallowed by the shadows. He walked quickly to booth 4, his notebook clutched to his chest. Mara watched him more carefully than usual, her chest still haunted by the bruise she had seen days before. She brought him a plate of chili and cornbread, setting it down gently as though she might scare him away. He gave her no glance, nod, or acknowledgement, only his silent routine. He began to eat, measured and deliberate. Mara hovered at the edge of the booth, wanting to ask and demand an answer he could not give. But when he finished and carefully wiped his mouth with a napkin and stood to leave, he broke the ritual. This time, the drawing he left was not on a notebook page, but on a paper napkin, the pencil strokes rough and hurried. Mara picked it up and felt her breath catch in her throat. It was her face. Drawn with quick but precise lines, her eyes wide, her mouth tense. Beneath it, in heavy, bold strokes, was a single word: run. Her hand trembled as she folded the napkin, the edges damp with sweat from her palm. It was the first word Noah had ever given her, his first attempt to speak in the only language he trusted. And it was not thank you or help, it was run. The diner spun slightly around her as she slid the napkin into her apron pocket, her heart hammering so loud she thought Mel behind the counter might hear it. The rest of the day stretched into a blur of fear. Every clank of the bell felt like a gunshot. Every customer who entered seemed suddenly suspicious. She spilled coffee twice, dropped an order slip, and earned a sharp glare from Mel. "Get your head in the game, Quinn," he snapped. "You're costing me money." She bit back the words she wanted to scream, that she was harboring a child with bruises and terrifying drawings, that she had just been told to run, that danger was creeping closer with every tick of the clock. That night, alone in her small apartment above the laundromat, Mara unfolded the napkin again and stared at it under the weak yellow light of her desk lamp. Run. The words seemed alive, vibrating against her fingertips. She laid it beside the drawing of the house and the sketch of the sharp-jawed man. A story was unfolding in pencil and paper, and it was a story with real villains, men who existed somewhere beyond her understanding. She thought about taking the napkin to Sheriff Rowan, but she knew his answer. Without names, without facts, it was still not enough. She was running out of places to turn. The next day brought confirmation that the warning was not imagination. At 2:30, while pouring coffee for a trucker, Mara glanced through the window and froze. A black sedan was parked across the street, half hidden by an oak tree. Its paint gleamed in the gray light, its windows tinted so dark they looked like obsidian slabs. It did not move, did not idle. It simply sat there, watching. Her hands shook so badly that the coffee sloshed over the mug's rim. She wiped the counter furiously, her breath short. At 3:15, Noah arrived as usual, slipping into booth 4. He bent over his notebook, but Mara noticed how his body stiffened and his head tilted slightly as if he heard something no one else could. The car did not move for 10 whole minutes, 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. When it finally rolled away, smooth and silent, she nearly collapsed with relief. When Noah finished his meal that day, he left behind another sketch. It was the car. Every detail was there. The long hood, the curved roof, the silver ornament, shaped like a bird with wings swept back. Mara stared at it and felt her stomach lurch. This was not a coincidence. This was not fantasy. He was showing her the truth. That night, she could not sleep. Every passing set of headlights outside her apartment made her flinch. She imagined black cars waiting for her, imagined men with cold eyes watching from the shadows. Her life had narrowed to 2 points of terror: the boy at 3:15 and the napkin folded in her pocket. She knew what the word meant now. Run was not a suggestion, it was a countdown. The following afternoon, Mara hovered by the counter, unable to focus on anything but the road outside. Her palms sweated against the rag she wrung between her fingers. At 2:45, she saw them. Not one car this time, but four. 4 identical black SUVs glided into the gravel lot of the diner, their engines low and menacing. They parked in perfect formation, boxing in her battered Honda Civic. The bell clanked once more, louder than ever in her mind. Noah's warning thundered in her ears. Run. But there was nowhere left to go. The engines died one by one, and with them the normal sounds of the small town seemed to fade into nothing. The diner, usually filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes, fell silent. Mara Quinn stood frozen behind the counter, her rag clenched so tightly in her hand that her knuckles ached. Every set of eyes in the diner turned toward the parking lot, where 4 black SUVs sat like predators staking out their territory. The doors opened in perfect unison. 8 men stepped out, each tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in sharp black suits and dark glasses that made the overcast day look like midnight. They fanned out with mechanical precision, their movements disciplined, efficient, and terrifying. 2 positioned themselves near the entrance. 2 stood at the far corners of the lot. The others formed a loose perimeter, their heads turning slowly as if they were tracking invisible threats. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to run into the kitchen, lock the door, and hide under the counter, but her feet would not move. Her eyes were fixed on the lead SUV. The driver's door opened last, and from it stepped a man who was not dressed like the others. His suit was gray, tailored to perfection. His shoes gleamed like mirrors, each step deliberate, assured. His hair was silver at the temples, combed immaculately, and his face was a mask of severe intelligence. There was no hesitation in his stride as he crossed the lot and approached the entrance. One of the guards pulled open the diner door for him. The bell gave its familiar clank, a pitiful sound against the heavy tension that filled the air. The man stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding the room. He did not look at the trucker hunched over a plate of eggs. He did not glance at the old couple at the counter. His eyes swept the diner once and locked directly onto Mara. She gripped the counter until her hands hurt, the napkin with Noah's warning pressed like a hot coal against her thigh in her apron pocket. The man stopped only a few feet from her. His voice was deep, smooth, and resonant, which belonged to someone who was used to being obeyed. "My name is Richard Hale. I am looking for a boy." Mara's throat went dry. The old couple at the counter shifted uneasily. Mel, her boss, shuffled forward, his cigarette-stained fingers twitching. "What is this?" Mel demanded. "Who are you people? If you're cops, show me a badge." Hale did not spare him a glance. His cold eyes stayed fixed on Mara. "We are not the police," he said evenly. "We are private security. We have been monitoring this diner for 2 weeks. A boy comes here every day, small, brown hair, quiet. We are here to retrieve him." Monitoring. The word hit Mara like a slap. They had been watching her, watching Noah, all this time. Mel swore under his breath. "Monitoring my dinner? Hell no. If this is about the mute kid, he doesn't belong to you." Hale's lips curved in something that might have been mistaken for a smile, though it never touched his eyes. "The boy is the property of our employer. He is vulnerable, prone to accidents, and requires professional care. He is a runaway. We are here to bring him home." Property. The word seared into Mara's mind, igniting fury intense enough to cut through her fear. "He is a child," she snapped, her voice trembling but defiant, "not a piece of property." Something flickered across Hale's face for the first time, a subtle crack in his calm mask. Irritation, surprise, annoyance. His tone sharpened. "Miss Quinn, I will not ask again. Where is he?" Her mind raced. Noah was not due for another 15 minutes. 15 minutes until that bell clanked again. 15 minutes until he walked straight into this trap. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice low but steady. Hale stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the diner's faint grease and coffee smell. "Miss Quinn, I can make this very easy for you, or I can make it extraordinarily difficult. My employer is a powerful man. He is also the boy's legal guardian. Obstructing us is not in your best interest." The room felt smaller, the air denser. Hale gestured with a flick and 2 suited men entered. They moved silently, placing themselves at booth 4, where Noah always sat. Their shadows stretched across the worn vinyl as they lowered into the seats with chilling patience. Mara's body trembled. She forced herself to move and pick up the coffee pot by shaking her hands. She poured for them as if she were any waitress, as if her heart were not pounding so hard it threatened to burst. The men accepted the cups without a word, their expressions unreadable behind the dark glass of their shades. Hale leaned in slightly, his gaze cutting into her. "He will be here soon," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. "When he arrives, you will do nothing. You will not speak to him. You will not look at him. You will allow my men to escort him quietly. Is that understood?" Mara swallowed hard, the word run blazing in her mind like fire. Noah's voice, silent for so long, echoing through a single, desperate plea. Run. But she had no way to warn him, no way to stop the inevitability that was creeping closer with every second on the clock. The bell clanked faintly again as the door opened to a gust of cold air. Every head in the diner turned, the silence thick enough to choke on. It was not Noah. It was only a delivery man with a box of supplies. The tension in the room did not lift. Mara's knees nearly buckled with relief, but her reprieve lasted only a breath. The clock read 2:59. In 1 minute, Noah would walk into this trap. The clock ticked with merciless precision, each second an echo that hammered in Mara Quinn's ears. She could feel the weight of Richard Hale's presence at booth 4, his calm authority pressing against the fragile walls of the diner like a storm waiting to break. The suited men sat rigid, their hands folded neatly on the table, but their eyes hidden behind tinted lenses never stopped scanning. The other patrons had gone silent, forks poised midair, conversations strangled into uneasy silence. Mara's hands shook as she wiped the counter for the 100th time, though it was already spotless. Her eyes darted to the phone on the wall behind her, the landline that was suddenly her only hope. If she could reach it, call Sheriff Dalton. Someone could have intervened before Noah walked into this nightmare. But Hale seemed to sense every flicker of thought that crossed her face. "I advise against making any calls, Miss Quinn," he said smoothly, his tone carrying the chill of inevitability. It would only complicate matters. One of his men shifted his weight deliberately, the scar along his jaw pulling tight as he did. The threat was unspoken but unmistakable. Mara's throat tightened. She forced her eyes back down, pretending to be busy with sugar dispensers. She could see the SUVs lined in perfect formation through the front window, their black surfaces gleaming with menace. The men outside stood as still as statues, but their presence radiated power. They had blocked her battered Honda Civic in the lot. Even if she managed to get Noah to the door, there would be nowhere to run. 2:59. Her heart thudded painfully. The old bell above the door loomed in her mind, its weary clank the herald of a boy's silent arrival. Every day at precisely the same time, the ritual is never broken. He would come because he always came. He trusted her. He believed booth 4 was a place of safety, and now it was the center of a trap. Hale sipped his coffee, his gaze never leaving her. The liquid sloshed quietly as he set the cup down, but his hands were steady, unnervingly controlled. He studied her like a chess master watching a pawn try to imagine itself a queen. He knew she would break. "When he arrives, you will remain silent," Hale repeated softly, as if imprinting the command onto her bones. "You will allow my men to escort him without interference. This can end peacefully if you cooperate." Mara's breath came shallow and ragged. She wanted to scream at him, throw the pot of coffee across his pristine suit, and claw at his perfect composure. Instead, she forced her lips into a trembling smile. "Sure," she whispered, "anything you say." But inside, panic clawed at her chest. Noah's drawings flashed in her mind: the angry man, the looming house, the sleek black car. And then the napkin. "Run." That word was louder now than the ticking of the clock. The second hand clicked to the top. 3 o'clock. The bell clanked. Every head in the diner whipped toward the door. Mara's stomach lurched. She gripped the counter so hard her fingernails bit into the wood. It was Noah. His slight figure filled the doorway, framed in the pale afternoon light. His brown hair fell into his eyes, his clothes still too big and worn. He clutched his notebook like a shield. His wide blue eyes scanned the room with haunting sadness for a split second. Then he froze. He saw the men in suits. He saw Richard Hale rising smoothly from booth 4, his sharp profile unmistakable. He saw Mara behind the counter, her face twisted in terror. The air shattered with a sound Mara had never heard from him before. A strangled cry ripped from his throat, raw and animal. A sound of pure terror. Noah spun to flee. The guard at the door was faster. His large hand clamped down on Noah's thin arm, yanking him back inside. The boy struggled violently, thrashing like a trapped bird, but he was no match for the man's iron grip. "Number!" The word burst from Mara, torn from her chest like fire. She vaulted over the counter, her body moving before her mind could catch up. Plates rattled, coffee splashed, but she didn't care. She ran straight at the guard, her heart slamming in rhythm with Noah's frantic cries. "Let him go, you're frightening him." The guard didn't move. His expression was stone, his hold unyielding. Noah kicked and twisted, his notebook falling to the floor with a slap. His silence, the silence that had defined him, was gone. He was gasping, whimpering, fighting with every ounce of his small body. "Stay back, ma'am," another guard ordered, stepping between her and the door. "Get out of my way," Mara shouted, pushing against him, her palms stinging as they struck the immovable wall of his chest. "Enough!" Hale's voice cut through the chaos, deep and commanding. "Get him in the car, now." The guard began to drag Noah toward the open door. The boy's desperate eyes locked on Mara's. She saw the raw, unshakable trust he had placed in her then. Trust that she was about to fail. Her lungs burned as she screamed, "Mel, call 911." The diner owner jerked in shock, frozen in fear until her words snapped him back. He stumbled toward the phone, his hands trembling as he dialed. Hale's gaze snapped to him, icy fury flashing in his eyes. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." But the ringing tone was already on the line. Mara lunged forward, grabbing Noah's other arm. She pulled with everything she had, her body straining against the guard's strength. It became a tug-of-war, a waitress against a soldier, a desperate boy caught between them. "You're not taking him," she snarled, her voice raw, her muscles screaming. Hale stepped closer, his shadow falling over them both. "Miss Quinn, this is your final warning. Let go of the boy." Mara's voice broke, but her grip did not. "You'll have to go through me." The boy clung tighter, his tiny fingers digging into her sleeve. His trust was her only weapon, and she refused to surrender it. Outside, the faint wail of sirens cut through the still air. The sound of the siren grew louder, cutting through the suffocating silence of the diner like a blade. Mara Quinn's heart pounded as the red and blue lights flickered against the windows, painting the checkered floor with fractured bursts of color. Richard Hale's jaw tightened, but his hands remained steady, folded neatly before him, as though he had expected this interruption. His men, however, shifted uneasily, their rigid formation disturbed by the distant howl of approaching authority. Noah clung to Mara's sleeve with both hands, his thin body trembling against her. His notebook lay discarded on the floor, its pages splayed open like wings. The boy's desperate blue eyes locked on her, begging her not to let go. Mara tightened her grip on him, planting her feet firmly even though her knees felt like they might collapse at any second. The door burst open with a clank. Sheriff Dalton strode in, his boots heavy against the linoleum, his hand resting near the holster at his hip. He wasn't a tall man, nor especially imposing, but his presence carried the weight of authority from years of dealing with ranch fights, bar brawls, and the kind of quiet rural crimes that demanded patience and backbone. His voice was steady, cutting across the tension with unmistakable command. "Somebody tell me what is going on here in God's name." Every head turned. Dalton's sharp eyes swept across the scene. The black suits stationed like statues. The convoy of SUVs outside. Mara crouched protectively over a trembling boy. And Richard Hale standing with calculated calm, his silver-templed hair gleaming under the diner's fluorescent light. "Sheriff, thank God," Mara gasped, her voice cracking with relief. "They were trying to take him. We have legal custody," Hale interjected smoothly, stepping forward with practiced composure. He pulled a leather wallet from his jacket and produced an identification card, extending it toward the sheriff. "Robert Hale, head of security for the Ashcroft estate. This child, Noah Ashcroft, is under the legal guardianship of his uncle, Mr. Damian Ashcroft. He has run away from his home in New York. We are here to ensure his safe return." Dalton took the card but didn't look at it. His gaze remained fixed on the boy, who was half hiding behind Mara's leg, his knuckles white as they gripped her jeans. The sheriff's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "Funny, he doesn't look like he wants to go with you. In my book, that makes this more than a family matter." Hale's expression didn't falter. He kept his tone calm and measured, the voice of a man accustomed to bending others with logic and confidence. "Sheriff, with respect, this is delicate. The Ashcroft family prefers discretion. Public attention could be damaging to the boy." "Damaging?" Mara snapped, her fear hardening into fury. "He had a bruise on his face last week. Is that part of your discretion too?" Dalton's eyes narrowed. He turned the card over in his hand, then slipped it into his pocket instead of returning it. "You and your men, outside, now. Nobody is taking this boy anywhere until I get to the bottom of this. My diner, my town, my rules." For the first time, Hale hesitated. He was clearly not accustomed to being challenged, least of all by a small-town sheriff. His men glanced at one another, waiting for his signal. Hale studied Dalton's face for a long moment, searching for a crack in the sheriff's resolve. Finding none, he gave a curt nod. "Very well," he said. "We will wait outside." He gestured to his men, who reluctantly moved toward the door. The bell clanked again as they exited, their sharp suits vanishing into the formation outside. But their presence didn't leave. It pressed through the glass like a waiting storm. Dalton turned to Mara and Noah. "Sit, both of you." He slid into the booth opposite, his voice softening slightly. "Start from the beginning, Mara. Tell me everything." Her throat tightened as she began to speak, the words spilling out in a rush. She told him about Noah's first day, the grilled cheese, the notebook, the silent ritual that became their secret bond. She described the shoebox filled with drawings, the salt shaker, the neon sign, the hand with her mother's ring. She showed him the darker sketches, the looming house, the sleek black car, the cold face with narrow eyes. Dalton studied each page carefully, his brow furrowing deeper with every drawing. When Mara placed the napkin on the table with the words scrawled in heavy strokes, "Run," he blew a slow whistle. "That's not the imagination of a boy doodling," he muttered. "That's a cry for help." Noah's small hand moved to his sketchbook. He flipped to a clean page and began to draw with frantic determination. Dalton and Mara leaned in as his pencil scratched across the paper. He pulled the same imposing house, but he added a figure standing at the gates this time. The face was unmistakable. Damian Ashcroft. Dalton sat back, the weight of the revelation sinking in. His jaw tightened as he looked at Mara and the boy watching him with wide, haunted eyes. "All right," he said quietly but firmly. "Until I get this sorted, this child will not be leaving with anyone. Not Hale, not Damian Ashcroft, not anybody." The sheriff's words settled over Mara like a fragile shield, but even as relief washed through her, she saw the shadow of the SUVs outside. They weren't gone. They were waiting, watching. And the battle was only beginning. The low growl of an approaching engine cut through the tense stillness like a warning bell. Mara Quinn stiffened, her hand tightening instinctively on Noah's small shoulder. Sheriff Dalton, bent over the boy's latest drawing, straightened and glanced out the window. His face darkened as the unmistakable silhouette of a long black limousine slid into the lot, its polished body glinting even under the gray Montana sky. The SUVs outside shifted in formation, their drivers and guards snapping to attention. Richard Hale moved to the door with sharp precision, his eyes narrowing as the limousine stopped directly in front of the diner. He reached the door just as it opened with quiet authority. A tall man stepped out, his presence commanding even before his polished shoes touched the gravel. Damian Ashcroft. His tailored coat brushed against his legs as he smoothed his tie with a casual gesture that carried an air of disdain. He was handsome in a cold, severe way, his sharp features softened only by the mask of charm he wore like armor. But his eyes betrayed him. They were the same narrow, calculating eyes Noah had captured in his drawings, eyes that held cruelty just beneath the surface. The diner seemed to shrink as he entered. The weary clank of the bell mocked the gravity of his arrival. Conversation halted, even the coffee pot behind the counter hissed to silence. Damian did not acknowledge the sheriff or Mara at first. His gaze went straight to the trembling boy pressed against Mara's side. "Leopold," Damian said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "There you are. You have caused quite a stir. It is time to come home." Noah whimpered and buried his face against Mara's arm. She felt the tremor that rippled through his small frame and wrapped her arm protectively around him. Sheriff Dalton rose to his feet, squarely between Damian and the booth. "Mr. Ashcroft," Dalton said firmly, "I'm Sheriff Dalton, and this boy isn't going anywhere until I answer some questions." Damian's lips curled into a polite but condescending smile. "Sheriff, I respect your diligence, truly, but this is a private family matter." He produced a folded document from his coat pocket with the grace of a man sure of victory. "Here is a court order from New York granting me full and uncontested custody of my nephew." Dalton didn't take the paper. His hand hovered near his holster, his eyes unyielding. "A New York order doesn't erase what I see right here. This boy is terrified of you. That makes it more than a family matter in my book." "Absurd," Damian snapped, his civility cracking for a heartbeat. "He's an emotionally disturbed child, troubled since his parents' tragic death. He requires specialized care, not the misguided coddling of a diner waitress." His venomous glare shot toward Mara, dismissing her with icy contempt. Mara's fury surged hot. "He is not disturbed, he's scared of you. Look at him." Noah lifted his head slightly, his eyes glassy but burning with defiance. For the first time, he did not shrink. He stared at his uncle, and the weight of that gaze carried more truth than words ever could. Damian's jaw tightened, but Noah reached for his notebook before he could speak. His hand shook, yet his strokes were deliberate, urgent. The room held its breath as the boy drew. The sharp lines revealed a study inside a grand house, a fireplace roaring, and a figure looming with a poker raised high. Another, more petite figure cowered below. Mara gasped. Dalton leaned forward, his face grim. And then Noah flipped to another page, drawing a portrait above the fireplace. An older man's face stern and watchful. He turned the page again, revealing the back of the picture with a hidden safe. Dial marked by a code, 102288. Hale inhaled sharply. His voice, usually calm, trembled with recognition. "That's not Alistair's birthday," he muttered. "It's the boy's." Damian's face drained of color. "Lies," he snapped, lunging for the sketchbook. "He's delusional." Dalton shoved a hand against Damian's chest, stopping him cold. "Hold it right there." But Noah wasn't finished. His pencil scratched furiously across one final page. He drew the diner's sugar shaker, the same one on their table every day. He added an arrow pointing inside. Then he drew a minor, old-fashioned key. Mara's pulse thundered as her eyes flicked from the drawing to the actual shaker on the table. Her hands trembled as she unscrewed the lid. Sugar spilled onto her fingers, and nestled inside was exactly what Noah had drawn. A tarnished brass key. The diner fell into stunned silence. Richard Hale's face hardened, all traces of doubt vanishing. His voice was low and deadly when he spoke. "The key is in Alistair Ashcroft's private file box. The one with his directives. The one that could ruin you, Damien." Damien's mask of composure shattered. His eyes darted to the door, calculating escape, but Dalton was already reaching for his cuffs. "You're not going anywhere," Dalton growled. Noah clutched Mara's hand tightly, his eyes never leaving his uncle's face. For the first time, the boy wasn't hiding. He was fighting with pencil and paper, and had just tipped the balance. "Damien Ashcroft," Dalton said, his voice carrying the weight of justice. "You're under arrest." The wolf had entered the diner, but the trap was already closing. And it had been set, not by the sheriff, nor by the waitress, but by a boy with silent strength and the courage to draw the truth. The hush that fell over the diner after Dalton's declaration was a sharp silence that seemed to slice through the air. Damien Ashcroft stood in the middle of the room, a predator exposed, his court order still clutched in one manicured hand. His gaze darted between the sheriff's unflinching stare, Mara's protective stance, and the boy's trembling but defiant eyes. For a heartbeat, it looked as though Damien might fight, might summon his guards back inside to overwhelm the small-town sheriff and the fragile waitress. But then his lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. His mask of power cracked, revealing the wolf beneath the cashmere coat. Sheriff Dalton stepped closer, his voice hard. "The key, the drawings, the boy's fear. That's enough for me to hold you here on suspicion of abuse and fraud. You're not walking out of this diner free." Damien's jaw worked furiously, but instead of words, he gave a sharp signal with his hand. Outside, the suited men stiffened, their allegiance visibly wavering between their employer and Richard Hale, who now stood like a stone pillar behind Dalton. Hale's face was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. Damien scoffed, though his eyes flickered with unease. "This is absurd. You're all being manipulated by the scribbles of a disturbed child and the hysterics of a waitress who doesn't know her place." He glanced toward Mara with venom. "I'll see you ruined for this." Mara's knees trembled, but she held her ground. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the room. "He is not disturbed. He's telling the truth. The only way he can. And I'd rather be ruined 1,000 times than stand by while you hurt him." Noah pressed closer to her, his sketchbook clutched tight to his chest, as if it were both shield and sword. His pale face was wet with silent tears, but his eyes burned with a strange, fragile bravery. Dalton's radio crackled, the distant whine of sirens growing louder outside. Deputies were on their way. The sound was both a comfort and a warning. The window of danger was closing, but not fast enough. Damien sneered, his mask slipping further. "You fools have no idea what you're meddling in. That boy isn't just my nephew. He's the heir to an empire that keeps half this country's commerce moving. Do you think the world will let a waitress, a sheriff, and a child decide its future?" He stepped forward, his words dripping with arrogance. "Money and power decide, always." Richard Hale finally spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "Not this time." His eyes cut to Noah, then to Damien. "Alistair suspected what you were capable of. He left safeguards. He trusted me, and he trusted the boy." Damien's nostrils flared. "Hale, after everything I gave you? After the loyalty I demanded? You betray me now for a slip of a child?" "No," Hale said evenly for the truth. Dalton's deputies burst through the door, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp with commands. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Damien froze, his hands rising slowly, his court order fluttering uselessly to the floor. His composure was gone, replaced by a predator's snarl, cornered and stripped of power. One deputy snapped cuffs around his wrists, the metallic click echoing in the diner like a final verdict. As Damien was led toward the door, he turned his head one last time, his cold eyes locking on Mara and the boy. His voice was low, almost serpentine. "You think you've saved him, but you've only made enemies you can't imagine. The people who wanted him hidden will come harder now. You've doomed him." Mara's stomach twisted at the words, but Dalton stepped forward, his voice steady as iron. "No, Ashcroft, we've given him a fighting chance, something you never intended." The deputies pushed Damien out into the parking lot, the crowd of onlookers pressing closer, their whispers filling the air. Some held phones high, recording every second. The wolf in cashmere had been dragged into the light. Inside, Mara sank into the booth beside Noah. The boy's small hand slid into hers, his grip desperate but steady. Richard Hale placed the brass key on the table between them, its dull surface catching the light. "That," he said quietly, "is the beginning of the end for Damien Ashcroft." Noah opened his sketchbook tremblingly and drew one last picture for the day. It was not a house or a car or a face. It was a diner, with light streaming from its windows and two stick figures holding hands inside. For the first time, his drawing did not speak of fear. It spoke of hope. Mara felt her throat tighten, tears pricking her eyes. In the silence that followed, she realized the boy was teaching her something profound. Even wolves in cashmere could be defeated, not by wealth or weapons, but by the courage of the voiceless and the refusal of ordinary people to look away. The diner felt like it had exhaled after holding its breath for hours, but the relief was thin, fragile, and temporary. Damien Ashcroft was gone, cuffed and escorted into the waiting cruiser. Yet the air still vibrated with unease. Mara could feel it in the tremor of Noah's small hand inside her own, and in the taut line of Richard Hale's shoulders as he watched the black SUVs idle like restless sentries outside. Though outwardly calm, Sheriff Dalton kept one hand near his holstered weapon, his eyes scanning every movement in the lot. Inside, the room was hushed. The few customers who had lingered now whispered to one another, their curiosity sharpened by the sense they had stumbled into something far larger than their world of morning coffees and truck stop gossip. Mara sat across from Noah in the booth, his sketchbook resting between them like an unexploded mine. Dalton leaned in, his voice low but firm. "Start from the beginning. I need everything, every detail." Mara drew in a breath, steadying herself. She told him about Noah's first day through the door at 3:15 sharp, his silence, his bruises, and the meals she had paid for from her tips. Her words carried the weight of months, the quiet desperation of someone who had seen too much and been powerless to act. She pulled the shoebox from beneath the counter, her secret hoard of Noah's drawings, and laid them one by one on the table. Dalton studied them with a mix of admiration and dread. The salt shaker, the fork, the neon sign, then the house, the angry man, the car with the bird-shaped hood ornament, the face carved in cruel precision. Each sketch was more than a picture, it was evidence, a diary in graphite. Noah's way of screaming without ever opening his mouth. Dalton lingered when he reached the napkin with the single word scrawled beneath Mara's likeness: "Run." The sheriff's eyes lifted to Mara's, the weight of the warning heavy between them. He slid the napkin into a protective sleeve from his pocket, as though it were the most delicate of artifacts. "This one," he said softly, "this one changes everything." Noah's pencil moved again, and the boy hunched protectively over his sketchbook. His strokes were urgent, frantic, as though his hand had been waiting. The page filled quickly, the same imposing house, but the perspective shifted inside this time. An expansive room with a fireplace. A portrait above the mantel of an older man with stern eyes. Beneath it, a hidden safe. He scribbled numbers in quick succession, his hand trembling but precise. Dalton leaned forward, his brow furrowing. 10/22/88. Hale inhaled sharply, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Alistair's safeguard," he whispered. "Not his birthday, the boy's." The older man knew who the heir really was. Mara watched Noah, her heart swelling with equal parts fear and awe. He flipped to another page, sketching again with furious determination. This time he drew the fireplace poker, jagged lines radiating like shards of violence. A small figure crouched on the floor. A larger one towered above, its mouth twisted into a ragged snarl. The accusation was unmistakable. Dalton exhaled slowly, his jaw set. That's no cartoon, that's testimony. The sheriff's voice carried the gravity of a man who had just seen enough to drag a titan of industry into court. Hale's eyes burned with both shame and vindication. He had followed Ashcroft's orders, blind and obedient, never realizing the boy he was meant to protect was screaming the truth all along. Then Noah paused, looking up at Mara with those piercing blue eyes. He turned the page once more. This sketch was slower, deliberate. He drew a diner table, their very table, and the familiar glass sugar shaker upon it. He shaded it carefully, then drew an arrow pointing inside. A small brass key took shape on the paper within the sugar granules. Mara's pulse quickened. She reached across the table and grabbed the real shaker, her hands trembling. It felt oddly heavy. She twisted the lid, the metal squealing faintly, and tipped it upside down. White sugar spilled in a stream and clattered a minor tarnished brass key. The diner seemed to stop breathing altogether. Hale stared, his voice a rasp. The key to Alastair's private file box. The older man planned for this. He hid the truth, which only Noah could find. Dalton picked up the key with a handkerchief, holding it as though it were the most valuable thing in the room. With this and the drawings, we have more than suspicion. We have proof. Mara reached across and wrapped her arm protectively around Noah, who finally set down his pencil, his small shoulders sagging with exhaustion. For the first time since he'd entered her life, the silence between them felt different. Not empty, not fearful, but alive with the possibility of justice. Outside, the sirens faded, the deputies securing Damien Ashcroft in the cruiser. But Mara knew this was only the beginning. Noah had revealed his secret, and the key in Dalton's hand was more than metal. It was a doorway, a promise that the empire built on cruelty and lies could finally crumble. And for the first time, she dared to believe that they might win. The low rumble of an approaching engine rolled across the gravel lot like distant thunder. Mara felt it before she heard it, a vibration in her bones that made the tiny hairs on her arms stand upright. Sheriff Dalton's head turned sharply toward the window, his hand drifting toward his holster. Pacing the booth like a man caught between confession and damnation, Richard Hale froze as though he already knew who was coming. Noah pressed closer into Mara's side, his small fingers tightening around her arm until she could feel the desperation in his grip. It wasn't another SUV, it was something worse. A long black limousine glided into view, its polished chrome and tinted windows gleaming even in the dull Montana light. The vehicle didn't belong to Oak Creek. It belonged to another world of power and menace that had no business in a town of rusted trucks and weathered storefronts. The diner grew silent again, the chatter of onlookers outside falling to uneasy murmurs. The limousine eased to a stop directly in front of the door. Its engine cut, leaving only the eerie sound of boots shifting in gravel as the black-suited men outside snapped to new attention. The rear door opened slowly, deliberately, as though the world should pause for the man who emerged. Jeffrey Ashcroft stepped into Oak Creek as if he owned it. His tailored charcoal suit clung to him with the arrogance of wealth, the silk of his tie catching the dim light. His hair was dark and meticulously combed, his features sharp, predatory, his smile thin and laced with contempt. The weight of his presence seemed to drag the oxygen from the diner, leaving only unease in its place. Mara whispered without meaning to, "That's him, the angry man." Noah buried his face into her side, trembling violently, his body reacting to the memory that had haunted every one of his sketches. Sheriff Dalton squared his shoulders, planting himself in the middle of the room as the bell above the door gave its hollow clank. Jeffrey Ashcroft entered without acknowledging anyone except the boy. His gaze slid over Mara and Dalton as though they were furniture, irrelevant and replaceable. His eyes locked on Noah, and in them burned a possessive hunger that made Mara's stomach turn to ice. "There you are, Leopold," Jeffrey said, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "You've caused quite a mess. It's time to come home." The words hit Mara like a slap. He didn't see a child, he saw property, a misplaced asset to be reclaimed. She pulled Noah closer, feeling his slight body quiver like a cornered bird. Dalton stepped forward, his hand resting casually but firmly on his weapon. "Mr. Ashcroft, I'm Sheriff Dalton. Before anyone goes anywhere, you're going to answer some questions." Jeffrey's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "Sheriff, I respect your small-town diligence, but this is a private family matter." He produced a folded court document from his jacket, holding it with theatrical care. "A New York court order granting me full custody of my nephew. I suggest you don't embarrass yourself by standing in the way of the law." Dalton didn't move. He didn't even look at the paper. "My job is to protect the people in my town. Right now, that includes this boy. And from where I stand, he looks terrified of you." Jeffrey's polished mask cracked for an instant, irritation flashing across his eyes. He regained himself quickly, his voice colder now. "He's disturbed and traumatized by the death of his parents. He needs treatment, not the coddling of a waitress playing savior." The insult was aimed like a dagger at Mara, but she didn't flinch. "He's not disturbed," she snapped, her voice rising with a strength she hadn't known she had. "He's scared of you because of what you've done." Jeffrey's jaw tightened, the facade splintering again. He slowly stepped closer, his height and confidence pressing into the space like a storm cloud. "He is my responsibility," he hissed, "and I will not let some diner girl or a backwater sheriff interfere." Noah stirred, his face pale but determined. He lifted his head for the first time since Jeffrey entered, his eyes locking not on his uncle, but on Richard Hale. The look was raw, pleading, as though silently asking him to choose a side finally. Hale's chest rose and fell heavily, sweat gleaming at his temples. He looked at Jeffrey, then at Noah, then back again. For the first time, his loyalty wavered visibly. The diner had become a battlefield, not of bullets but of wills. The wolf in cashmere stood before them, cloaked in legal authority and predatory charm. But Noah's silent defiance shifted the balance. Mara held her ground, gripping Noah's shoulder like an anchor. Dalton's eyes never left Jeffrey's, unblinking, unyielding. And for the first time, Jeffrey seemed to realize that his empire of intimidation would not be enough here. Not in this town, not against a boy with a sketchbook, a sheriff with a backbone, and a waitress who refused to look away. The standoff had begun, and the wolf had revealed his teeth. The silence that settled over the diner after Jeffrey's outburst was suffocating. Mara could feel every beat of her heart against her ribs, a drum of fear and fury. Noah was trembling beside her, his little hand clamped onto her sleeve, as if letting go would mean being dragged back into the darkness he had fled. Sheriff Dalton's jaw was tight, his stance unyielding. But even his presence couldn't quiet the storm gathering inside the diner's walls. Jeffrey sneered at the boy, dismissing his fear as delusion. "He's unstable," he spat. "He makes up stories." But Noah didn't shrink this time. He reached for his battered sketchbook, his fingers trembling but steady enough to flip to a clean page. The pencil scratched against the paper with furious intensity, the sound harsh in the quiet room. Every eye followed him, the power of his silence transforming into something unbreakable. He drew quickly, first the grand Ashcroft estate, its looming gables and oppressive windows captured with uncanny precision. Then he added a room inside, a study with tall shelves, a wide desk, and a fireplace. On the hearth, he sketched a fireplace poker. Then he drew himself as a small stick figure curled on the floor while another towered above him, its jagged mouth twisted in rage, the poker gripped like a weapon. The accusation was unmistakable. Mara's stomach churned as she glanced at Jeffrey. His mask cracked further, fury breaking through the polish of his practiced charm. "Lies," he barked, lunging toward the boy to snatch the sketchbook. Sheriff Dalton stepped between them, planting a steady hand against Jeffrey's chest. "Hold it right there. You're not laying a finger on him." Noah wasn't finished. His pencil flew again, moving faster, bolder. He sketched a painting above the fireplace, a portrait of an older man with stern features. Then he flipped the page, showing the back of the picture with a hidden safe behind it. He drew the dial, then carefully added a sequence of numbers, 102288. Richard Hale, watching from the side, gasped. His voice cracked with shock. "That's not random. That's Alistair's code, his birthday." Then his voice faltered. No. Not his, Noah's. The boy's. Jeffrey's face turned ashen. He barked out denials, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. Noah's hand steadied as he turned to a final page. This time, he drew something smaller, familiar. The sugar shaker on the diner's table was the same one that had been there daily. He sketched an arrow pointing to its glass belly. Inside, he drew a tiny, old-fashioned key. The room froze. Mara stared at the drawing, then at the shaker itself. Her pulse raced as she reached for it, unscrewing the metal top with trembling fingers. The glass felt heavier than it should. She tipped it gently, the white granules shifting until something metallic slid into her palm. A tarnished brass key glinted in the dull light. No one spoke. Even Jeffrey's protests died on his lips as the truth hung heavy in the air. Noah hadn't just been hiding, he had been guarding. This child had carried the weight of an empire's corruption and hidden its undoing in the one place no one would think to look. A diner where kindness had offered him sanctuary. Richard Hale's expression hardened, the last threads of loyalty to Jeffrey snapping as reality sank in. That key, it opens Alistair's private box. The files, the will, everything Jeffrey has been trying to bury. His voice grew darker, sharper, the psychiatric evaluation. The proof is that he bribed a doctor. It's all in there. Sheriff Dalton's hand hovered near his cuffs. His eyes never left Jeffrey. Looks like your nephew just exposed the truth you've been hiding. And it's more than enough to hold you. Jeffrey's composure was utterly shattered. His eyes darted toward the door, searching for escape, for one of his men, for any shred of control. But the men in black were still outside, and their loyalties were shifting with the tide of revelation. Richard Hale's hand moved toward his radio, his jaw set. Noah pressed closer to Mara, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She bent her head to whisper, her voice steady despite the storm. "You're safe now. You did it." The boy's blue eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not just fear but fierce determination, the courage of someone who had carried too much and finally laid it bare. Sheriff Dalton's voice broke the silence. "Jeffrey Ashcroft, you're under arrest for child endangerment and conspiracy to defraud an estate." His handcuffs gleamed in the light as he stepped forward. Jeffrey snarled, his last weapon a desperate, hollow arrogance. "You can't prove anything." But his eyes betrayed him, flicking once more to the key in Mara's hand, proof of his downfall. The wolf in Kashmir had finally been cornered, not by a rival or a courtroom, but by a silent boy's drawings, a waitress's compassion, and a truth too heavy to bury any longer. The diner that had once been a quiet refuge had become the stage for justice, and every clank of its weary bell seemed to echo with the sound of a dynasty unraveling. The flashing lights of Sheriff Dalton's cruiser faded into the night as Jeffrey Ashcroft was led away in handcuffs, his face twisted in a mask of impotent fury. The men in black suits, once the instruments of his power, now stood silent and unmoving under the steady gaze of Richard Hale. Their allegiance had shifted with the weight of truth, their discipline no longer tethered to a corrupt master, but to the boy who had silently endured so much. Mara sat in booth 4 with Noah tucked firmly against her side, his small frame still trembling with the aftershocks of the storm. His sketchbook rested in his lap, the final pages filled with the drawings that had exposed everything. The sugar shaker key gleamed faintly on the table, symbolizing the fragile but undeniable victory they had wrestled from the jaws of despair. Richard stepped forward, his once cold demeanor softened with regret. "Miss Carver," he said quietly, his eyes settling on Mara, "I owe you an apology. I thought I was protecting him by following orders. I was blind to where the real danger was." He looked at Noah with something almost like reverence. "Your courage saved us all tonight." Mara shook her head, her voice raw but steady. "He saved himself. I just gave him a place to eat." Noah's eyes flicked up at her, and for a moment, the boy who had lived in silence seemed older than his years, burdened but unbroken. In the days that followed, Oak Ridge became the unlikely center of a storm that spread far beyond its borders. Lawyers and trustees arrived, bringing sealed documents and directives from Alistair Ashcroft's estate. The The safe was opened with the brass key, its contents as damning as Noah's drawings foretold. Proof of Jeffrey's fraud, testimony of his cruelty, and a will that ensured the boy's future was shielded from greedy hands. The media swirled outside, desperate for a glimpse of the boy heir who had brought down one of the most powerful men in the country. But Sheriff Dalton and Richard Hale kept them at bay, protecting Noah's fragile recovery from the crushing weight of public spectacle. The boy who had been voiceless now held a story louder than headlines. For once, the world would have to wait. Mara's life shifted in ways she could never have imagined. 1 week after the arrest, Richard returned to the diner, his posture more humble than she had ever seen. "Mel is retiring," he told her, gesturing toward the faded Rosie's Roost sign. "The Ashcroft Trust has purchased the property. They want you to have it, free and clear, with funds to renovate. They call it an investment in kindness." Mara's breath caught in her throat. Owning the place that had been her prison and sanctuary seemed impossible. But as she looked around, the worn booths, the faded linoleum, the tired bell above the door, she realized it could become something else. A place of safety, a harbor, a beginning. 2 months later, the doors of Bridget's place opened with a soft chime, the weary clank of the old bell replaced with a gentler sound. The diner gleamed with new life, polished wood floors, comfortable booths, warm light spilling across walls adorned with framed sketches. Every drawing Noah had left her was there, the salt shaker, her hand, the house, the car, the angry face. They told the story of silence, survival, and the power of being seen. On the reopening day, a black sedan pulled into the lot. Richard Hale stepped out, his presence steady but no longer imposing. He opened the door for Noah. The boy was transformed. His clothes fit him properly, his hair neatly combed, the shadows gone from his face. He walked confidently, though his hand still tightened around his sketchbook. Inside the diner he paused, his wide eyes scanning the place that had once been his only refuge. Then he walked straight to the counter where Mara stood, her heart aching with pride and tenderness. She knelt so their eyes were level. "Hey, Noah. Welcome home." The boy's lips parted. For the first time in Mara's presence, his silence broke. A soft but clear word carried all the gratitude and trust he had never been able to voice. Mara. It was more than her name. It was a declaration, a promise, a bridge across months of silence and fear. That word was worth more than the Ashcroft fortune, or any reward or recognition. It was the proof that kindness, persistence, and courage had carved out a space for healing. Life in Oak Ridge returned to its rhythms, but the diner was never the same. Travelers stopped for coffee and pie under the glow of the new sign, never knowing that within its walls, a dynasty had collapsed, and a boy had found his voice. But those who had been there remembered. Sheriff Dalton still came by for his usual black coffee, nodding at the sketches with quiet respect. Richard Hale kept his word, overseeing Noah's transition with loyalty now firmly anchored to the boy. And Mara Carver, once just a waitress, became the keeper of a story that would outlast them all. She hadn't sought heroism, but she had chosen kindness every single day, and that choice had saved a life, unraveled corruption, and given a child a chance to grow not as a shadow, but as himself. Sometimes, the greatest revolutions begin not with power or armies, but with a grilled cheese sandwich, a pencil sketch, and the courage to care when no one else will. In the quiet chime of the new bell above her door, Mara heard the truth she would carry forever. Heroes aren't made in moments of glory. They are made in the quiet corners of the world, where someone decides to see the unseen and to love the forgotten.